Welcome to Dangerous Policy. I'm Charlene.
I'm Crispin.
And this is our week in review. So Dangerous Policy is a platform aimed at intelligent people where we discuss important issues facing life and society.
Nailed it.
Yeah, I know. Thanks for listening. How are you, Crispin? How's your week going?
Yeah, pretty good. A lot's happened. I received an email from a student at a high state university.
Oh, yeah.
Asked me some questions about some work that I'd done. And these was a sort of kind of out of the blue. And I was like, this is great. I thought I did this a number of years ago. What's prompted this? And they're, I'm doing this course, blah, 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 your required reading. And they sent me the syllabus.
A required reading.
Yeah. And then apparently, so on academia something or other edu,
yeah,
they track your citations, like how many people cite you in academic journals that are peer reviewed and published. And I had no idea. So I had over 1,600 citations in various peer reviewed journals. The latest one that was uploaded, because I haven't gone through the list because you have to pay money, and I was just like, I don't care enough. But there's different journals. So the latest one was on medieval studies. So perhaps someone has been watching our podcast and talked about Lithuanian history and actually started putting it in academic journals. That's my hope. And so, if you watch this video and you are an academic or you've been doing citations and things, please send us an email. Let us know, if you've been getting things out of our talks.
Yeah, that's so. In the academia world, that's like such a goal. It did be sounded so many times and required reading at uni.
Well,
you look at this paper
my
so good. And like, this person is so. Oh wait, it's me.
Well, no. See, my opinion of academics is so low, right?
Why?
So academia, I think higher learning, higher research, understanding like new things, discovering new things, coming up with new ideas.
Yeah.
Of course, that's what we're all about here. We're discussing that sort of stuff here in this channel. But I do find the culture of academia, like that's where cancel culture is at its finest. The UK has just announced a new set of laws to its great credit. So Boris Johnson, the UK government, as of I think yesterday, announced laws to make freedom of speech in university campuses a requirement for government funding to be received, thus because they were sick of the deplatformings. The most notably in the UK, only 1 in 10 academics voted Brexit, and of those that voted to remain in the UK, a vast majority wanted to overturn the results of the referendum. So the referendum comes in and they were just like, let's like ignore it. Let's have keep voting until this. And then there were some academics, most notably Matt Golden at the University of Kent, professor of political science, really clever guy, Matt Goodwin, I think. He said, look, how about we respect the result? Like this is a democratic vote. And he was completely cancelled, from all speaking, like invitations. He received all these threatening messages. People tried to get him fired. He's the most like reasonable guy. He's not some radical. And yet, like this culture has infected academia across the world. What if you're an academic? Okay, this is what's destroying your reputation. Like, if you're an academic, your mission in life is to pursue truth.
Yeah.
That's your mission.
Mm-hmm.
It's not to be a social activist. If you're an activist, join a political party. Do your activism that way or as a private citizen. Do not try and use your platform as a professional to push your own social agenda.
But do you think that academics have pressure from external organizations and funding? Because I know research relies on funding heavily.
Of course, but that's a different type of pressure. A lot of that pressure is about commercialization. So if you are trying to get a grant, then you put in your grant proposal, well, you have to describe why that grant is going to benefit the culture, the society.
Yeah.
And so things like, we are studying how to improve the milk production of cows, for example, right? That would get funding because you can demonstrate the commercial benefit to the whole society of that research. Whereas if you were trying to say, look, I want to understand more about what freedom means to, like as it did in the video, to Americans in 21st century contemporary United States, you get funding from certain sources, but they would largely be those that have a particular view or agenda they're trying to push. Another great example is a lot of groups, religious groups, funding research into the origins of the Black Sea. So there was an event, I think 7,000, 8,000 years ago, where the Bosphorus that exists between the Mediterranean and the Black Sea burst. The Black Sea was a sort of salty basin. It suddenly had a massive flood as the Mediterranean Sea just burst into that whole thing and completely flooded the continent of Europe and Middle East. And a lot of people think that that's where the origins of Noah's Ark, the flood of Gilgamesh, all of those myths come from, because everyone would have experienced such an epoch event. But there's a lot of evidence against that too, in terms of that being the origin. So a lot of this funding comes from groups that are trying to prove the Bible to be true, and so there's a lot of those pressures. So there's commercial pressures, there's special interest pressures.
I know nutrition, like Nestle is a big funder for a lot of like nutrition papers. So it's always interesting to see if cacao is the next
health food, superfood.
Yeah. It's so interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. So the special interests, of course, fund their own stuff. And of course, tobacco companies, did that for many years. But having said that was more an exception rather than the rule. Like the culture is something that is entirely in the control of academics and entirely in control of university staff, and the culture has become paralyzing. The fact that yesterday the Australian National University. Now, I want to be clear about this. There's been some misreporting on this worldwide. There was a reporting that this is university policy. It's not. The university has distanced itself from this policy. But a major thing was released saying that we should start calling breastfeeding chest feeding and use more gender-neutral language when it comes to, providing for babies and things like that. So that in our university courses we should be talking about changing pronouns and all kinds of stuff. This is like,
it is part of some university policies, so not assume.
Oh yeah. Some universities have gone that way. It's insane, right? Like, I mean, it's fine to have that ideology, but it is certainly in a tiny little ivory tower that and this is the problem when companies use university echo chambers as like their own, what's going on Twitter is the real world, because it's a large echo chamber on Twitter. It is a large echo chamber, but it is an echo chamber. Like the university staff, academics, they have these conversations with themselves. And I'm very pleased that the United Kingdom has gone in the direction of being like, no. Like, the university is there to open minds, not indoctrinate. Right? That's, you're to pursue truth. You're there to create people who have the critical thinking skills to think for themselves. You need to be able to disclose the strongest possible arguments about what you believe. And in fact, you should be doing that in everyday life. You should be able to articulate the argument against what you believe in a way that the people that are proponents of that argument wish they could do themselves. And if you could do that and still critique it in an effective way, then you have strengthened your own arm and discussion. Whereas academics are now at the forefront of totally eradicating that. That instead of they've become new biblical indoctrinators. They say, look, here's the conclusion of what is true in the world, and here's what those radical right-wing, far-right freaks will say, as concealing their privilege or whatever. that's just totally antithetical against what academics are supposed to be. Academics are supposed to be pursuers of truth and openness of mind, and their failure to do that is a total disgrace on Connor's entire academic field, and the criticism they're receiving is entirely legitimate. The university, like academics, used to have overwhelming community support. Like you poll people in the community, what do you think of academics? I think it was something like 86%. So they had high confidence in what an academic said about a topic. So if an academic said, the history of like colonial things, laws in this area was this, the overwhelming majority of people would say, I trust that over the politician who's telling me otherwise, right? Whereas now it's much more even between those academics and politicians because they're kind of perceived as doing the same thing. Academics are not there as sort of neutral clerks as dictionaries looking up the historical record. They're seen as activists in the same way that politicians are activists. And that's just eradicates their function in society. The academics need to be repositories of truth and knowledge and sage-like wisdom that is devoid of the political bias. There was a museum in Australia that has changed all its wording around the colonisation of Australia to invasion. Right now, this is a debate that comes up every year, and perhaps next Australia Day I'll do a video on it. But this person sent me a bunch of academic papers that they'd used to justify that decision, right? Because I didn't raise it; they raised it with me. They were kind of thought I'd be interested, and I was like, "Yeah, I'll read through the papers." I read through the papers. And I've seldom seen, like, because there was a legal paper that had done it, basically arguing that there was sovereignty in Australia and that the sovereignty had been violated. Now, I don't want to get into the legal kind of like gymnastics of this, but it was one of the most absurd propositions and worst arguments I'd ever read in a peer-reviewed publication. Like a generation ago, it would never have been published. And in fact, the author, to their credit, the author himself realized how weak his argument was and did put in a lot of qualifications to try and get it past some reviewers. But the fact that policy within public institutions had changed based on that, and that clearly this was a work of activism and not academia, was just one minor case of a much larger story where what academics are doing is they're publishing things that are exceptionally weak in terms of scholarship, and then using that, their credentials as academics and this peer-reviewed publication as the basis of new knowledge that we have. And
then push their agenda.
Yeah, exactly. And that's not acceptable. That is a total... it diminishes all academics everywhere. The level of scholarship diminishes, the level of knowledge diminishes, and it's not the role of academics to actually do this.
Yeah, it's quite disappointing actually, but I don't know. Like that's why I guess like medicine and things are more absolute. Like because I've been I've been in the process of like actually getting something peer reviewed and then having to talk to the reviewers and put the comments. Like it takes forever. Like it's not an easy process, so I'm shocked that it actually does happen like so easily in some cases. Like journals don't do their due diligence,
but journal editors are subject to the same thing. So something was published. I don't want to say in Nature. It was in a major biology journal that was filled with just actually, I won't use that example. There was something that published in Harvard the other day, or a month ago maybe, about the topic was racial disadvantage in nuclear weapons.
Okay.
And it's everything you would imagine.
Like, how do they link?
They found a way.
Okay.
Now, there is no way, I'm sorry, there is no way that this has academic merit. There just isn't, right? the reason it was published is because the institution itself wanted to demonstrate its prostration points before the woke ideology. Say, yes, that's right, systemic racism in the nuclear field, I think is what it was called, something like that. And the only way that can be justified is because the institution wanted to show how it was tackling systemic racism using subject matter that's insane, okay? But that's perverted the highest institutions. That was Harvard that put that out there. That the institution infamous for prejudicing against Asian students in their admissions program. I mean, that I have almost no respect for academics today, and it's really sad because I grew up like everybody else did in my generation, looking up to academic scholars and people who are at the forefront of intellectual thought and learning and pursuit of truth, and people who have made new discoveries. I mean, there are academics who have passed into history who really extended our field of human knowledge, who are being retrospectively cancelled because of some perspective they had said on something completely extraneous to their own work. Even Shakespeare is being cancelled in certain parts of the United States. I saw this article the other day saying that Shakespeare was sexist, misogynist, blah, 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 all the buzzwords. And thus, we need to have a diverse view of literary, scholarship. And thus, we will no longer be teaching Shakespeare. And I'm like, the English language was made by Shakespeare to a large extent, and the concepts of how we perceive our philosophy, his interesting critiques and examples of Christianity through Measure for Measure, things like that. Amazing. His takes on Julius Caesar, are just extraordinary stuff. True genius. And yet, because he was a man of his time in some ways, having moved between Hay on Wye and Swindon in the 16th century.
With all this newfound knowledge, why is our society so easily cancelling people or cancelling things in our culture? I would have thought, right, that over the years as we expand our knowledge, there's more information out there, that we would be less woke and more informed. But it seems that
you can break them into categories. Okay, so there are different people. There are people who don't believe cancel culture exists. They think that, No. There's no such thing as cancel culture, and if someone
they need to be accountable.
Yeah, exactly.
They're responsible.
They're getting the consequences of their actions. No one's restricting their freedom of speech, and then there'll be people that say, "Oh, it's all private companies. Private companies can do what they like," and then there'll be people who say, "Oh, we're just holding them to account for their transphobic views and things like that, or we are decolonizing history." It's probably the famous academic buzzword. That is that, yes, the reason why Shakespeare is so prominent in our Western literary tradition is because he was a white man, and it was at a time when black voices were suppressed, and thus the only reason we venerate Shakespeare is not because of his actual literary contributions that he made to our Western culture, but because the voices of others, minorities, were marginalized, and thus we need to rewrite our history books to give greater voice to those who were oppressed minorities at that time. Now, that is an ideology that otherwise intelligent people actually believe, but if you critique it at any 5-second point of view, it completely dissolves in your hands, right? Because the first question you ask is relative to what? What society in the world in, say, the 16th century was more inclusive than the British Empire? Was the Chinese more inclusive? Was Russia more inclusive? Was the African kind of Zulu Empire more inclusive?
Do you think because we just live in a world full of so much wealth and prosperity that people are just trying to create problems?
I really wish that was there was that moment when the pandemic first hit.
Yeah.
That intelligent people, sort of Douglas Murray, a few other philosophers, were like, you know what? This might be a good thing in one way, that first of all, we'll have a shared experience of hardship that we'll all go through together. And that might bring us a bit closer together as human beings. So that could be a good thing. But also, once you have real problems that this pandemic creates, real problems, you stop worrying about imaginary problems, right? You stop worrying about, whether the trans athletes should be like competing in women's sport, and you focus more on the actual how we're going to feed people when like no one can work the fields.
Yeah.
And there was that brief moment where we had that hope, I think, that this would, for all the problems, would actually kind of create some perspective on the real problems of the world. And I think that held up until George Floyd. When the Minneapolis police officer had his knee on George Floyd's neck and George Floyd died, and the massive BLM protests erupted around the world, and all of a sudden social distancing gave way in the leftist media to the protests, irrespective of whether or not they had the problems. Like, we had those protests in the UK and in Australia, where we just, Australia, a different case, but in the UK, like, there's no violence from police towards black people in the UK, and yet it just blew up across the English speaking world, and we went back to what it was. Although there is that one moment of hope, which is that the French, much to my Anglo embarrassment, the French government have completely, which is weird because a lot of these ideas originated in France, but they've utterly rejected this woke ideology. The French government was asked about this, the other day, and they gave the most base reply. Like, they were just like, oh yeah, this is American ideology that they're trying to export to the rest of the world, and they're just enemies of truth, there's problems in the Islamic society, cult communities in France. They're committing terrorist acts. We need to do something about this. We're not interested in woke kind of apologies for it. And you see these reports in the West and of course in the Middle East and Al Jazeera saying, look, the French shouldn't be, defending Islam. And they should understand that some things are sacred, and therefore they should expect these things to happen. Certainly, Turkey's President Erdogan did this, and Macron, to his credit, is like, "This is France. We have freedom of speech. We have freedom of expression. We have freedom of religion. We have rule of law. And if you're in France,
you respect that.
You do that. Just as if we're in Saudi Arabia, we follow their rules, right?
Yeah.
And that, I wish the Anglosphere would do more of that. Be like, okay, we have our cultural traditions, but because this narrative is taking hold among academics with whom I just have nothing in common, they think that our entire Western civilization is based on original sin, that everything that has been built up in the West is a product of slave ownership and violating the rights of others. And there's a complete misread of history. All of the societies that are doing really well that aren't English-speaking societies today, that aren't, Western Europe and so on, are former British colonies, right? They've like Singapore isn't doing so bad, that's
the thing. I was reflecting on just how, again, we speak so poorly of Western traditions, but then there is so much of Western culture that we should be proud of.
It's not for nothing that the vaccine was first invented by Edward Jenner, Scotsman, right? Who eradicated smallpox worldwide effectively. Or how scurvy was understood by Sir Joseph Banks, and then increased fruit in people's diets for that reason. The gifts that Western Enlightenment tradition has given the human race are immense, and also in terms of governance.
You finish it off.
Oh, okay. So the card was full, so we'll move on. I think we've kind of had that rant, but in short, it was nice to be cited so much.
Yeah.
But I don't personally see this as any kind of achievement or indication of social status. My most it is gratifying to hear from students. I really like if you are doing a course and you come across my work and you want to reach out, you obviously have to watch this video, but please do. I will always respond to questions and give people direction on where they might want to take it. There's someone when I wrote a piece in the national interest years ago, talking about Trump. This was during the campaign before he was elected. There two young men, early career, co-wrote a piece critiquing what I'd said. They were deeply. The actual title was "Why Roe v. Wade is Wrong About Trump," and it was plastered across the United States. It was a good effort. I mean, obviously, I don't think they were correct, but I was absolutely delighted that they were, willing to take me on in that way. To be honest, not that many people are willing to debate me on these things. So, full credit to them. And yeah, if you have a criticism of my work that I've done in the past, please chuck it up, because I'd love to read it.
Yeah, definitely. Like, I still think there's hope in academia, because actually working in it and, doing my honours, like, I was dreaming all about research papers all the time and thinking about it late at night. Like, you don't stop when you do research. You actually do not stop. So, I don't know. I still have hope that there are researchers out there that always want to seek truth. But yeah, let's move on before we...
Yeah, well, hopefully that new law in the UK is a step in the right direction. We'll see what happens with Oxford and Cambridge and the many other panoply of universities in the UK. Hopefully, if we see improvements in those places over the next few years, perhaps it's a model that others will follow.
Sounds good. So this week talked about the US. Is the US declining? Is it not? And talked about the relative and then the absolute decline. Relative to other countries because of China's rise in GDP. And yeah, what I got from the video is kind of a mixed bag. One thing that stood out to me, though, was how you kept talking about the US needs to course correct and needs new leaders. And, like, what did you really mean by that? Like, course correct in every way, like every way that the line of thinking and their policies and the way it feels like to be proud to be American rather than feel shame. I don't know. What did you mean by that?
Okay, so if you think about what makes a country strong, one of the things, of course, is the size of the economy, which the US has a large economy. One is its military force, which the US is unequal. But another thing that is important is the strength by which people can use the term we, right? When we say we, we're talking about a collective, whether it's we, the supporters of this team, we, a political party, we, the people who work at a particular industry. It's part of our identity. And as Roger Scruton, the late Roger Scruton said, we is the broadest term for the nation state. That's the highest level at which we use the term we. Unless aliens come down from outer space, we won't have anything that identifies us beyond that. We will say we Australians, we Americans, we British. Right?
Yeah.
And the strength to which someone can identify with another person that they don't know based on that identity is an indicator of their national strength and cohesion, right? So if I was to meet another Australian anywhere in Australia, I would have pretty significant confidence that I would be able to get along with a random Australian in another part of the world and see eye to eye on a lot of, like, more things that we would disagree on, okay? Like, certainly there are people with whom I have profound disagreements, of course, in day-to-day life. I am an opinionated sort of guy. But on the spectrum of, like, things that we would have as shared values, shared identity versus differences, for the large majority of Australians out there, there are many more similarities than differences. And I think we would both experience that. In the United States, that's less and less the case, where, if you're from Alabama and you go have a conversation with someone in San Francisco, and let's say they met at a bar, in Brazil or whatever, would they get on Would they be able to see eye to eye? Would they be able to feel like they were the part of a group of two in a broader group of people that were mostly foreign? I don't have that confidence like I would have with the US of the 1950s, 60s, and 70s.
It's quite interesting how Americans associate themselves with their state rather than the country. Because in Australia, like, yeah, we're Australian. No one's like, oh yeah, like, no, I'm a Queenslander, or like, I'm from the Northern Territory, but they're like, I'm from Alabama. Like, I don't know.
That's a much bigger thing in the US. I mean, part of it is, of course, just the size of the US. Yeah. Our national population is 20-something million. That's like half California, whereas, but also, I mean, Americans fought a civil war where a whole bunch of states seceded from the Union. And when they fought against the British, they fought, as colonies. So this whole national United States of America thing is still ambiguous. And and the way the system works, I mean, as we've said in other videos, most states have one political party, really. Like the fundraising, the organizational structure, the recruitment all happens for one party in the place. And what they do is they go dump that money in a few battleground states where there's a bit of diversity. So unless you're in Pennsylvania or Ohio, Wisconsin, or places like that, that are kind of swing states, Florida, then you're not really exposed to different points of view very much. And when you are exposed to different points of view, they can seem very foreign. I mean, the differences between states in the US really do feel like different countries. If you go from, Utah to Nebraska to West Virginia, you end up, you feel a very different place.
Yeah.
So so I'm worried about American national cohesion. Having said that, the Chinese could make some mistakes here. The Japanese, in the lead up to the Second World War, they kind of convinced themselves that America, whatever its GDP, whatever it's like, it was kind of a paper tiger. That America, they were decadent. They had all this kind of, they didn't really have a national cohesion. They were kind of doing their own thing. Whereas in Japan, every man's life was the emperor's. Like it was, they felt like they were all one fist, and thus, because of that sort of force, they should be able to just kick the Americans out of Asia completely and repel anything the Americans try to do, and that the Americans, just through weakness, would give up.
Yeah.
And they seriously underestimated Americans in that respect. The U.S. determination not just to win the war, but to win the war completely, was insatiable, and the Japanese did not understand the costs that the Americans were willing to impose on themselves in order to see that outcome. The Chinese could make that same mistake. I think the Chinese government looks at themselves as like, we're the leaders of the Han civilization, we all have this unity, conformity, we're all working on pulling in the same direction. The culture is one of like trying to fit in and support the government, and we've got a unified people. And that's true. Like there is a strong narrative to that, the whole mandate of heaven thing.
Yeah.
But and they look at the United States and they look how divided, and they've tried to impeach a president twice, and they've got like their media basically reporting to one group or the other, and
but they also have media that reports to one group.
Oh yes, but they're all one group in the Chinese eyes. Okay. Whereas in the Americans, they just look at this culture that's massively divided, and they think, well, how could they possibly stand up to China's growth? America's fading away rapidly. I think that's their view, and I don't think that's correct. I think that very easily the Americans could rally around something, and if that thing happened to be China, then God help the Chinese. World War II was a great national experience for Americans. And as I said in the video, after the Second World War, kind of through the 60s, every person in Congress was a veteran of the war. So, whether you're a Democrat or Republican was really irrelevant compared to the fact that you're in the 105th, and you could sit down and like you might have a profound policy disagreement with someone, but you would still have a drink with them and work it out, kind of shake the hand and nail out a deal, and trust one another. And so that belief that they were all Americans first really came through, and that's not the case now, but it could be. Something could happen that unifies the country. The last time that happened was September 11, when the Twin Towers came down and everyone felt like a New Yorker in the United States, and everyone was on the same page. But then it all fell apart with the Iraq War. But for a 2-year period, everyone in the US was kind of like, yeah, we're on the same page. We all believe the same stuff, and we're all in it together. And that could happen again. Something could happen in the US where everyone's just like, no, let's put aside this perennial crap. Realize we're all Americans. We all believe kind of fundamentally certain things, and thus we could pull together. But the risk is, there is a risk, is the narrative of historical injustice that, Martin Luther King had a dream that one day you would judge not by the color of your skin, but the content of your character. And what this narrative is saying is like everything that's happening in the US is every privileged group has got it by oppressing others, is the narrative. And we're seeing this not just with white groups, but now Asians and Indians and others that are doing well in the United States. When Asian communities are outperforming, white communities, if you want to divide up society that way, significantly in the economic stakes. And thus they're now considered oppressors. So there is I
remember that video you did of me.
Yeah.
You're like, Charlie's oppressing me.
Yes, and that's weirdly not like some of the videos that we've made are prophetic. Like that was just one little instance, but but now, like if you look at these kind of woke narratives, you've got these white adjacent groups, so-called. Asians now being removed from those groups. I saw an advertisement, which was basically totally illegal, saying, please no whites or Asians apply because we're looking for marginalized groups. So there's this belief system now that could really undermine things, that we're not all Americans first, we're oppressors and oppressed.
Yeah, it kind of sucks when jobs and stuff have a quota or something that I don't know what it's based on, but is it just to prove that they're inclusive when they have, I don't know.
Yeah, that's a whole other.
I better not go into that, but.
So it is concerning that this could really tear America apart. Unless they defeat this ideology, expunge it from their institutions and corporations, then we're going to.
On a practical level, would Americans just, I'm not American, so I can't be like, do this. And why would I do that? Because you have your own freedoms and rights. At the same time, it's kind of like, challenging people to talk to each other in general, right? Like talking to somebody from the other side and practicing debates and not cancelling. I don't know.
Yes, I think that I have to believe that a large majority of people are just not sufficiently engaged. That this woke ideology is an echo chamber that's extremely powerful because it's a product of people who had previously been indoctrinated in university campuses and then gone out into the workplace and infected institutions like the New York Times, Disney, places like that. And thus they've accepted these kinds of things without thought, and that the large majority of Americans reject it. But they're not sufficiently engaged with the subject material or politically engaged to challenge it. So the advice I would give to Americans is to just educate yourself and people generally. And I don't use the term educate yourself the way the left uses it. I mean, like, just become literate in the narrative and understand that the world is not divided into oppressors and oppressed, or, bourgeoisie and proletariat. It's divided purely in terms of economic inequality, right? Which affects everybody. You can be white and be suffering that. It can be in some lumber mill area where the timber industry is tanked and your jobs have been shipped overseas and your place has gone into malaise and poverty. Just as easily as you could do that if you're in a black community or Hispanic community. Like, that's not the way society is divided. And that we should, when we think of public policy options, we shouldn't be thinking about raising up certain racial groups. We should be thinking about raising people up who need help. And if we can de-racialize the language in the way that Martin Luther King had dreamed, we will achieve a much more perfect union in the United States. But dividing people up based on identity politics is just a recipe for division and disaster. I remember when there was an interview.
Well, it's good because the other person's always going to be an other if we do it that way, right? We've got to remind ourselves we're all people at the end of the day, with problems, different kinds of problems, but they're still problems.
Oh, and that term "we" is quite important, because if we say "we," then there's also a "them," and innately through human nature, we value "we" more than we do "them."
Yeah.
And so if we say that we, African community, or we, the woke progressive left, believe that those on the other side are them, then them can be devalued.
Do you think that the woke ideology can fall apart given there's so many holes in it?
You would think so. You would think.
You
would think so. Like the contradictions. So the horseshoe bent all the way around and touched in a way that was amazing. There was the Washington Post published an article titled, and I kid you not, this is like last month, I kid you not, it was titled, "We Have to Talk About Multiracial Whiteness."
Huh?
You can Google it. Everyone at home, we have to talk about multiracial whiteness. I.e., we think only white supremacists could be supporters of Donald Trump. But when we look at the demographics of people supporting Donald Trump, we see all these different ethnic groups. They've been indoctrinated with a culture of whiteness. And that's, I mean, it's insane. Like, it is possibly the best article ever written in terms of just like multiracial whiteness. Like,
no, I can't take it seriously enough.
And published not in some wacky, academic, but in the Washington Post. So,
wow,
you would think that would be the end of it. Like that would be the moment where people would go, that is insane. But no, people take it seriously and think that there's wisdom in this. But so we're at the end of the road in that sense. I hope that I hope that it fades, but it's going to take a long time. I think it took a generation to happen. It'll probably take another generation to fully expunge it. It's filled with contradictions. It's totally insane, but it is immensely powerful and very loud, and very good at destroying those that oppose it. Because if you control information, if you control tech giants, if you control, I mean, how many people are being raised by Disney Plus? Like 95 million subscribers. People have Disney Plus not because they enjoy it, but because it babysits their kids. I mean, imagine. I
mean, I did watch a nice movie on Disney Plus the other day. Soul. Have you heard of Soul?
I heard the term Soul.
Yeah, it's like but Pixar is different to Disney in terms of they have their own team and they're a bit more independent in their creativity. So, I mean, look, I just wanted to. When you watch Disney, you expect just fun, right? You don't really expect huge, big messages. But I feel like Pixar does tackle some big issues. So I guess it talked about life purpose and like, does everybody have a purpose in life? And I mean, ultimately it said that actually, no, it's all the little joys in our lives that bring us purpose, not one thing. But no, it was, I don't know, like I think there is hope. I like to think there is hope in this, and I think we'll look back at this time and be like, God, we were ridiculous. And we'll cancel ourselves. Let's rewrite history. Like, we weren't that woke. I'd like to think, but yeah, we'll just see. We'll see. But I like that idea. You know, I think more and more people who come to our channel are intelligent people that want to have this kind of conversation, challenge these ideas, and, you know, that is how we're going to start it, really.
Yeah, and by the way, if you believe all this stuff, like, you're still absolutely welcome to leave comments.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Like, obviously, I'm, I have firm views, but I don't attack the audience. Like, I might disagree, but I will, as I said earlier on, try and strong arm your opinions as much as I can, and you know, the nicest thing that I can say about the woke ideology is that for a lot of people, there's an intention to do good. They see injustice, they see problems in the community, and we want to overcome those problems, and they think this is the solution. Now, this is not the solution at all, and it's going to make things much worse. But that motivation, that empathy is something not to jettison. Like, that's a critical part of our human compassion, and people who go, maybe I have got things really good. Maybe I haven't earned all of that, myself. Thus, people who are disadvantaged, I have to think about. That's there is luck in life. People do get ahead through things that are just flukes of nature.
Yeah. That's what I was gonna say. I'm like, well, I'm gonna put myself. I'm a health promotion person, and I do have a lot of lefty values.
I'm pretty sure that the camera is about to turn.
Yeah, it's like she's cancelled. But yeah, no, for sure. Like, even though some people might view us, like perhaps you, like, we are woke lefties and radical, it's like, no, like, we do want to do good for our community, and we want to try to figure out ways to reduce inequalities. And yes, like, sometimes we think that going out and protesting is a way to do that because, it brings communities together. It's a purpose. I don't know. Like, it's just, I mean, not everybody's like that. I wouldn't go out there just because of the virus and stuff. I'm from fear, but like, people do that and express their views in different ways. And I think, yeah, ultimately, yes, like, I think people do have good intentions when they're trying to bring their ideologies forward. It's not out of, not intending to do harm. Do no harm is one of our big values, but yeah, I do like the intention of the left. That's what I want to say. Do I agree with everything? No. Do I agree with everything on the right? No. But yeah, somewhere down the middle, like this, I don't know.
And everybody is.
Yeah.
Everybody is, like, they're things that people have scattered across that entire spectrum. So yes, well, I mean, I wasn't actually lying about the camera, so I will restart that, but then we can talk a bit more about health promotion. That'll be interesting.
Okay.
Okay, so we'll talk about health promotion, and we'll link it to gambling, the topic.
Yeah, so this week you discussed about gambling, because in the news, Crown Casino, which is one of the largest casinos in Australia, is kind of under investigation due to money laundering.
Yeah, they've lost license in New South Wales, so they can't operate a casino in our largest jurisdiction.
Yeah, and but you kind of brought forward in terms of, like, the culture of gambling in Australia. Like, we're one of the biggest gamblers in the world. We have lots of poker machines, and it's widely accepted to gamble. And it's also a big part of our culture, especially sports betting, I feel. And yeah, Melbourne Cup. Yeah, Melbourne Cup is a big one. But yeah, what are we going to say?
My problem with health promotion. Okay, so health promotion, for those that don't know, we have a group of people in Australia that come from usually academic backgrounds who engage in trying to tackle social ills like tobacco and alcohol.
We focus more on prevention.
Crime prevention, public health measures, population health measures. Nothing wrong with that at all. But the way I find they go about it is extremely adversarial. So understandable to one level is that a lot of this was born out of the tobacco fight. So for those that don't know, Australia has the most restrictive tobacco laws of any major country anywhere in the world.
And the lowest smoking rates in the world because of that.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, so taxation is like, you don't want to even know how much it costs to buy a packet of smokes in Australia. It's the value of like a week's salary in Indonesia. It's just insane, right? And there's no advertising, it's all plain packaging, and I was in the Commonwealth Department of Health when we did that. And so there's a lot of significant things about health promotion that has vastly reduced the rates of cancer, disease, heart disease in Australia. You go out into restaurants and pubs and clubs in Australia, and it's very nice. You're not getting drowned in cigarette smoke and things like that. It's very pleasant outside. So that's a triumph of health promotion, and that required a adversarial relationship with tobacco, which fought them every step of the way. Unfortunately, that socialization, that culture has created let's say, an acerbic attitude among many health promotion professionals, wherein they don't see themselves as like people who are just one interest group among many, but really the angels of the world out to fight the demonic corporations that are destroying our culture with all of their social ills for horrible profits, like while they fire little puppies into the air and use them as clay targets, like they're kind of that's how health promotion specialists in my experience see themselves, that they're the angels fighting all the demons, and if only they could elbow their way through all the money and corporatism of these terrible giants that own everything, that they would save the world on behalf of the little people. Now they're motivated, they're cute, but like they don't realize that most people in corporations are just people who have families and have problems in their own lives, and they have stresses and issues, and they're worried about their sister who's sick, and they've got to wrangle their kids, and there's one kid who's got like a drug addiction, and they don't realize that they're talking to individuals. They think they're talking to entities. And as a consequence of that, they write themselves out of the conversation. Like, they and because they treat everyone like it's a tobacco company, they think that a wine producer, right, is in the same category as a cigarette manufacturer. And as a consequence of that, they don't have reasonable discussions with ordinary people. They become the fun place, and people kind of just start to roll their eyes whenever they speak. What should be the case is they go, all right, you have this gambling in Australia, and it's causing immense harm all across the community, right? But there's also some amazing positives. It employs a ton of people who are just good people trying to get a good job. It's really entertaining for a large number of punters who don't experience harm. They're just out to have a really good time. It's a really good way to meet people, like socially. It's a good conversation starter. Like, people can talk about gambling in Australia and have a conversation about what they think is happening in various sporting fields and so on. Like, it's a good lubricant. And it's exciting, and it's fun, and it's like positive for the large majority. But there are some terrible practices that go on where people who have lost millions are expressly targeted because of their value, or these poker machines where they just isolate people in these little bubbles where they zone out, and it's programmed to convince people that to stay for highly addictive, psychology processes of the brain. And these things need to be stamped out. But because health promotion just has this very adversarial relationship with everybody, right? Because they're the beacons of light, and as Gough Whitlam famously said, only the impotent are pure. They just write themselves out of the conversation because they don't engage effectively, and everything's a fight to them. It's not like they can sit down as reasonable people and compromise on issues. They can't sit down they would feel dirty if they were like associated with the gambling industry, for example, and that's just not the way to be. Like gambling industry people are like everybody else. They're good people. They want to do good things. They don't want to like make their profits off the backs of the disadvantaged and the poor. They just go where the money is because that's the obvious thing, and they don't have any reason not to. And so what you need to be able to say to people is appeal to their reason. You go, okay, well, if we get rid of these regulations in these areas that would allow you to open more tables, that we, still profitable, employs people, doesn't cause, as much harm and so on, is more reasonable than punter and so forth, engages people, you can observe them more directly because they're physically playing there. Whereas if you've got people locked up in these machines for years on end, I mean, there was a friend of mine who, like, in our city, the casino closes exactly twice a year for about 8 hours. First of all, it closes on Christmas Day till about midday, and it closes on Anzac Day till about midday. So Anzac Day being our veterans kind of holiday. And what you would have is people at closing time leave and then line up at opening time so they can run to their machine because they're worried that someone else will
take their machine
or get their great win that's just about to pay out. And that sort of stuff is incredibly harmful. And we know that that's not the way gambling is supposed. It's not pro-social. It's not part of the culture. And our gambling apps, where sports betting is by far and away the fastest rising form of gambling in Australia. We know who it appeals to. We know how it works. I do not have any sports betting gambling apps on my phone or anything. Never have. But because I know that, like, I would love it, I would absolutely love it. I'd finally be interested in sport and be a true Australian, but there's a balance, right? Like, it's perfectly fine for people to watch the tennis and be like, okay, I think Nadal will do whatever within a reasonable space, but it shouldn't be incentivized in such a way that people feel terrible that they've like lost money, they lost their rent, they're worried about people finding out. There should be a way to do that in a pro-social way, that the reputation of gambling entities in Australia improves. And
that's the fundamentally why in health promotion, I mean, it is still a discipline. You need to go to university for it because we are grounded in evidence. Every recommendation comes from evidence. We don't just blanket be like, this is bad because X, Y, Z, and it's a corporation, so they want to make profit. I mean, at the end of the day, they do need to address their bottom line. But I do understand where you're coming from in terms of, you can't just have a single approach to, what we did to tobacco to do to gambling. Like, it is different. It is a different problem in itself. And we actually have similar approaches, like with the idea of harm reduction, right? So in Australia, like, there's big thing with vaping. I mean, that could be a totally different. I'm not even going to go there. Saying change of harm reduction, but yeah, with gambling, like you said, like what you've suggested is a form of harm reduction, and we, as health promotion, we've actually advocated that in drugs too. So, like, in terms of having injecting rooms, and we had a huge backlash from religious groups against that. But it still allowed people to engage in it in a safe way. So I guess what you're suggesting is having like some sort of harm reduction measures rather than stamping out, no online poker or whatever, like completely banning it and completely banning this and that, like having...
Yes. I mean, there's one difference between gambling and drugs, right? Is that gambling is a legal product, whereas drugs are illicit in most jurisdictions. And people argue, what you should do is you should legalize all drugs and then have their production, distribution regulated and taxed and kept to a certain health standard, and that would reduce harm. Okay, now that would reduce harm for every individual use. Like if you're using heroin, you would know that the heroin was produced in a safe pharmaceutical clinical grade way, and that the volume you're taking is not going to give you an overdose, and that people can track your progress and so on. All of that is true. But you would also increase the amount of drug use in the community. If all drugs were legal, right?
The market would increase.
The market would increase, right? So with gambling, we're dealing with a space where gambling is already ubiquitous in Australian culture and Australian society, and restricting gambling is not reducing gambling; it's just driving people underground. It's part of the culture.
I think our biggest fear is to have more young people engaged in gambling, because a lot of these gambling products, like the evidence shows, it appeals to children, because they're actually, instead of watching a game of sport, they're actually already understanding what odds are before even looking at the sport itself. And that's what I think a lot of health promotion is like, why is something that, Australian sport is such a big part of our identity, like why does it have to always be associated with gambling and alcohol?
But it's another tool. Okay, so
that's what
there's half of it I agree with, and the other half I have my health promotion eye roll, right? The half that I agree with is that it is definitely a legitimate concern to the Australian public and people around the world that children know about gambling before they know about sport. Okay. At the same time, children are being used as an advocacy vehicle in a pretty manipulative way, right? People are always like, "Oh, won't you think of the children?" And they're playing on the fears that parents have without addressing the harm that's happening right now. Like the vast majority of people who gamble in Australia are, there are different types of gambling and different types of gamblers, so it's not true across the board. But for the fastest growing area, which is sports betting, men aged 18 to 37, 38, single, fully employed, and they run up huge debts through their phone apps, running lots and lots of bets. Average loss of around 8% per transaction. That, that's the group that you need to target, right? But instead, people are like trying to change legislation using examples about children and what could happen to children, because they know it's more effective, right? They know that people care more about children than they care about single men.
Well, it's prevention, more or less, because a big part of that, if we were to target that group, say 18 to 34-year-old men, it would be less effective.
Exactly.
It's only less effective because, like, you'd be like, well, why? Like, I have my own rights. Like, I should be able to respond. Personal responsibility argument. And that's what we come across every time in health promotion, is our personal responsibility argument. Like, we're trying to make it easy for people to be healthy and, like, make good decisions, but still, feel empowered to gamble or, like...
Well, I wish that were true. Like, that is the space where health promotion actually does contribute. So, for example, no. Like,
all the other spaces.
Well, there's a lot of places where it's counterproductive. But for example, walkable neighborhoods. We just say, like, okay, we know that people will walk to the supermarket if it's within this proximity, and if it's not, they'll drive. Okay. And if they walk, then they carry all their groceries. So they're getting a ton of exercise. They walk there, they get their groceries, they're carrying it all the way home. They've got a weighted load as they're walking, and that burns a certain number of calories and increases their heart rate and all the rest of it, increasing their overall cardiovascular health. Now,
that perceived safety in neighborhoods as well, as more people are around, and you feel like more inclusive in your community. Yeah,
and we can absolutely track heart disease based on that. Okay, so that urban planning stuff, health promotion has a critical role in that. Population health, all of that stuff, really useful. Okay. But when they say, oh, we want to run up against the individual choice argument, and we don't want to do that, so we're going to manipulate it so as we appeal to children, because we go, well, everyone agrees they don't have consent and therefore don't have the same sort of, self-aggrandizement. Thus, without that agency, we can appeal to parents and therefore manipulate policy in that way. That is a disgusting way of going. What people should do, right, is go, yes, you do have personal responsibility and freedom of choice. And what we want to do, as with walkability, is make it much easier. When I go to my shower, when I get up and go have a shower, I have all my weights next to the door, so that, like, even though I'm super lazy and don't want to go to the gym, I know that there are those weights that on the way to the shower I can actually get up and do. So I do that every single day. And then I go to the shower and have my shower and wash it all off. And it's great. Like, it's a perfect system. And why do I do it? Because it's easy. It's part of my natural routine. I can get some exercise. I can do my weights. and it's not disruptive to my day. Now, health promotion people could actually be constructive, and they could say, look, just like our walkable neighborhoods where we set up our urban planning to make it easier for people to get improved cardiovascular health or choose healthy food options and all the rest of that, we can say we can make it easier for young men who have problems with gambling to control their spend and have a more mutual shared responsibility between industry and the punter. So the industry has a responsibility to provide ethical services, to detect patterns of harm as they're emerging, to implement their algorithms so that they can detect these things and have interventions to prevent certain practices. And then they can target specific practices, like people being passed around when they self-exclude from one service and are then targeted by another service with all these incentives to join. Like that sort of stuff. Whereas to kind of just say, oh, we're running up against this argument. It's a legitimate argument. People do have freedom of choice. And thus, you shouldn't be fighting that. You should be like, okay, you're right. You do have freedom of choice. We don't want to stop you from doing that. How can we make it easier so you have more control? And it's the simple stuff like, okay, let's have a profit and loss statement that appears in every time you load up the app. Okay, appears right there. You know how much you've spent. You know how much you've lost. Right. You then have the tools. It's like with the star rating. Great idea, right? With the food. So in Australia,
against star. Like this on the star rating.
I mean, it's a bit nefarious in terms of what gets stars.
And it was done with industry as well. That's why it's so weak, in my opinion. Okay, as health, I think it's a really confusing system because thing is, right, the star rating. Well, so what they do is they grade it by the line of products. So as a normal,
just to describe what the star thing is.
Okay, so. It's not compulsory, so people can companies can choose to be part of the star rating. But say you have like milk and you have bread or whatever, and on the milk would be like out of 5, how healthy is it? And generally, because milk is whole food, it'll be rated 5 stars. Now, somehow a box of cereal full of sugar and fats and everything is also rated like 4.5 stars. Consumers are confused to be like, why is this processed box of cereal full of sugar and fat also rated like pretty high, and it's because the star rating is by like products. So it's like of all the boxes of cereal, so it could be, a bad sample of cereal, essentially, it's graded really high compared to the others, relative to the other products on the shelf.
Right.
And that's why, and it was actually made with industry, which is good. I mean, like it's good to have industry input. And I do agree that I think health and
if it's voluntary, you need industry's input.
You need industry input, but it's like, it's good. I think what your point is to have more engagement with industry and like come to consensus. But at the same time, I feel like there is still room for improvement.
For sure.
So to
get that example you've given is a terrible example. Like, I mean, terrible as in it's a good example, but terrible that it happens.
Yeah,
that people get a 5-star rating or 4.5 star rating and they think it's good food, but it's not. That's outrageous.
Yeah, and it's kind of like, just like it. I mean, I know the intention is meant to be good, but it's very like obscure. So that's where like my biggest fear is, like as a practitioner, health promotion is kind of like, well, where does it stand, right? Like, I guess like an argument will be proportionate to harm, but like it's like.
Here's a question for you though: would you prefer not to have the star rating?
Yes, and to educate people on nutrition, like proper nutrition, because it's like. But then again, I do like front of package labeling, if it was because there is evidence for front of package labeling to improve consumer choice. So, I mean, like, you could go, if you think of an example of, say, a family and they always have cereal, and I guess it'll be useful for that family who are super busy, have no attention to, they want to make the best choice, and that's a quick way for them to make an easier choice. But,
absolutely. So from what you've said, I'm very sympathetic to the idea that something packed with sugar and crap is given a high star rating. That's outrageous. That shouldn't be the case, and they should reform the system to prevent that from happening. But a quick and easy way where people don't need to understand the intricacies of the differences between different forms of like nutrition and vitamins and whatnot, and can just go, okay, well that star has a higher rating and therefore it's going to be better for me than that thing that has a less rating, is something that is intuitive for people and appeals to their personal choice. Like if they want to ignore the star rating, that's absolutely their right, and they can choose the less nutritious food, and it makes it easy. Like that's It's like that video that I did on freedom, right? Where we don't necessarily trade freedom for security, but we do for convenience. And if we found it more convenient, more intuitive to do things in a less harmful way, absolutely we would do that.
I do think, though, the star rating has improved companies to be more incentivized to reformulate their products. And it has changed the culture. Well, I think in Australian culture, like, there is a shift towards, like, fitness and health. I don't know about you, but, like, that's in my circles.
True. No, it is.
Like, it's becoming more of a bigger value in our society. And because of that, we're getting a high rise and, like, low sugar options and, like, here's some meat alternatives or whatever. Like, there seems to be a bigger interest because so I guess there is, like, pros and cons to it.
Look, I think you're right to say that if something's packed with sugar and objectively is bad for you, they shouldn't have a higher star rating. Like, of course, I can understand that, but the wonder, like the idea of a star rating, okay, which has been accepted, is great for everybody. It's great for people who work in that business. Like, as you say, like if you're working in a place and you see something has a 2-star rating, and you're like, you know what, we could change this, and this, and it would be a 4-star. Why don't we do that?
Yeah.
Like, that improves the product development and distribution. And then for families and people who, aren't, like, they're not all going to be health food promotion specialists, right? And they go, oh, okay, well, that looks healthier, so I'll grab that pasta rather than that one because that one seems like it's worse. And that's a very a great way to do it, and appeals to human nature and appeals to people's personal choice. Like, they feel like the health promotion people then have informed them and empowered them to make their own choices. Same with the walkability. They feel like their choices have increased. They can choose they can still drive to the store and do whatever, or they can, walk to their local supermarket because it's not very far, right? That it's that sort of thing. But when health promotion people get out there and say, oh, it's these industry people who are bloodsuckers trying to, like, increase their profits and blah blah blah. Yes, for-profit businesses do pursue profit. I know it's news, but, like, the people who make it up are not generally unreasonable. And if you attack them right out the bat, they're going to be thinking, okay, how do we deal with these people, right? As opposed to, oh, how can we bring them into the tent and bring them? So one of the things that I was very proud of with Lottery West when I was working there was that we had very, like, aggressive academics and health promotion people who were willing to work with us because we cared about what they had to say and would implement their reasonable suggestions, and we would be able to. We felt we had a good enough relationship that if we had something, we were like, this is going to be really profitable for us. Is there any way we can work this so as it doesn't, like, cause harm? We could have that conversation. Whereas I don't think the gambling industry writ large can do that with the health promotion people. Like, they go, oh, look, I want to introduce this new form of gambling that we think will generate about $3 million a year. We are concerned about some of the harmful implications that this could have. Could you talk to us about how we could improve it? What most health promotion people say is, we don't want more gambling, is what they'll say. And I'm like, okay, thanks, ostrich. I find it very hard to bring myself to respect that position. But the field has so much promise, like, improving people's knowledge, making it easier for people to do safer things, reducing the harm caused by certain things. Great stuff. But not everything is tobacco. Not everything is like every cigarette is doing you damage. Like, it's like most things are not causing you harm. They can cause you harm.
I mean, what I'm really proud of, like, being part of this dangerous policy project, is I'm no longer in my left field. Well, the thing is, right, because... I'm
like, all right, Charlene, move the camera to the left, go to the right, further to the right, further to the right.
Oh, God. But, and it's been really refreshing in that way to have different ideas come at me and challenge my own ideas. I mean, it's not like university meant to indoctrinate. It is meant to open minds, and I feel like my mind has been opened studying at uni. Right, because and I think, I'm definitely like, if health promotion people actually watch this, I encourage you to do the same. Like, it's actually a really refreshing way of, going about things and actually, I mean, advocating your ideas, but then also challenging them and like rethinking them. And it's been a really eye-opening experience, in my opinion. To the point that I remember, meeting a politician from like a different viewpoint, political ideologist, and I had a general conversation with him, whereas my colleague did not. And it was a eye-opening experience. I didn't realize how much I had changed in like, being more open to new ideas and being open to be challenged, actually genuinely listening without feeling like the other person's an other because I don't see the value of health that I see it. But I'm still proud of being part of health promotion. Yes, we might look as loonies, but again, we have very good intentions to make health an easy choice, and to, and reduce social inequities and,
Well, it's like with the academics thing. Like, I love academia, but I have a low opinion about many academics. I love health promotion. I mean, it's weird. I did study... For all of my criticisms of health promotion, I did do some social epidemiology in my history under a brilliant professor. But it's the health promotion people that really get under my skin. Charlene is a wonderful exception who has an open mind and does change my perspective on things too from time to time. Not worth mentioning here.
Nah, like ego. And again, like I always get challenged in the comments too, which is amazing. It's been really, really good. So again, like you said, I'm not like you challenged me in terms of not being a blanket statement against gambling. I gamble a bit. I love scratchies. I can't help it.
What we call scratchies, like those instant win cards that you buy. We have one that's super popular in Australia called Wordplay. Like it's like a
love that one.
They're little crosswords. People love them.
Oh, I learned it, and like for my birthday, I requested scratchies. I was like, this is the time. But I can see both sides. Been good. All right. Any final thoughts while we wrap up?
Look, Australia had some amazing economic statistics come out. Australia has reached, well, not in terms of its economy, but in terms of its employment. It has reached its pre-pandemic levels of employment in less than a year. After experiencing the first recession in 30 years, the recession that's already over, Australia's economy is freaking amazing, and we have privileges here in Australia that just people can't even imagine.
What's possible?
Perfect great standard of living, continuous growth, good social cohesion, and now employment starting to return to normal levels. That's amazing. So. Yeah, you really win the lottery of life if you're here in Australia. So that's my final thought there.
That's quite amazing. Like the programs that we have in place in Australia. So when the COVID hit, they had the JobKeeper program, which was to help businesses pay their staff wages. And then they had the Job Seeker program for those who've lost their job and then had some help in terms of finding work. And then now the Job Maker program, which is to incentivize businesses to hire young people again, who are part of the Job Seeker plan, and then they'll help compensate that plus add extra in terms of training and all the ongoing costs required to recruit.
With a massively high minimum wage in Australia, like in the United States, they're arguing about $15 an hour. We're well above that already, and our unemployment rate and the US unemployment rate is the same. There's also the fact that we could afford these programs because our national debt was so low relative to basically every country in the world. If we look at Japan, that has 250% of GDP, I did a whole video on it, their national debt, and then their economy shrank last year by 4.8%, continues to do trouble. I mean, we're just super lucky. How about you? Final thoughts?
Final thoughts, but Yeah, I think I wasn't trying to thought because I was thinking of like that Australian Open. Here's my final thoughts. I was really into the Australian Open and
tennis.
Yeah, sorry, tennis for international viewers, and it. Oh, I was so excited. I never really got into Australian sports in general, but it was quite funny seeing. Well, it's not funny at all, but like Victoria had to go to lockdown. And the Australian Open had to keep going, and when they had to call out at 12:30, 11:30 because it was 12 o'clock shut down. 11:30, the crowds had to be like, you have to leave the stadium, that kind of thing, and I was like, boo, boo! Like it was so loud. Like people were so upset that it's like not stay till midnight for the tennis. And I was like, so proud of Australian people.
Really pushing the envelope of the rules as far as they can.
Yeah, really. Like it was so loud that the coverage for it had to move outside. Yeah. And then it was really strange again, like when the match was so tight. And I was like, oh my gosh! And then you hear the crickets, like nothing. Yeah. So I mean, I'm happy that Australians are very proud of their sport and are willing to stand back and for their love of sport. But yeah, it was
well, there's one like I like the tennis. The one thing that I really admire about the tennis is the same thing that I admire about a poker tournament. Is that the two things they have in the thing they have in common is that unlike football or rugby or other sports, it's not like you can always win from whatever position you're in. It's not like the clock is winding down and you're like 10 goals down and it's all over, right? Like it's not like people are going to leave the stadium before the match finishes because why would you? Like you anything could happen. Like you could be 4 sets down or 2 sets down and like fight your way back in, win to 4th set and come and like win the 5th set.
Or like deuce and then it goes advantage, then deuce again. Oh,
exactly, right. There's a real arm wrestle there, and you can do that the same in poker. You might lose like 2/3 of your stack in a poker tournament, but as long as you've got a chip left and you haven't busted out, you could ultimately win the tournament. And I think that's a truly special thing. It creates a real like never die feeling, and I think tennis also has that as part of the culture. So yeah, Australian Open. Good stuff. Yeah. Really good match the other day between. Oh my goodness. I can't remember the name.
Yeah, I can't remember the names either, but that's okay. All right. Any questions? Any feedback? Please leave that below. Have you got anything else?
No, that's it. Thank you so much for tuning in, and hope you all staying safe and looking forward to post-pandemic world as the vaccine starts to roll out. And I'll see you next time.
Yeah, see you next time.